Dawn over the James River looked like any other. The water moved slow, thick with morning mist. On the banks, settlers bent to their work, men sharpening tools for the fields, women pulling weeds from tobacco rows, children crouching near the water's edge, watching for fish. March 27th, 1622. Friday, the air, warm for spring. No wind, just the hum of insects and the rhythmic creak of a watermill somewhere upriver. Everything routine, everything safe, everything about to shatter. The night before, a young Powhatan man named Chanco had lain awake in the home of Richard Pace, a planter whose land sat across from Jamestown on the south side of the river. Chanco had been converted to Christianity, lived with the Pace family, shared their meals, their prayers, their trust. That night, another Powhatan had come to him with instructions. Tomorrow morning, kill them all. Kill Richard Pace. Kill his wife Isabella. Kill the children. Use whatever you can find. Axes, knives, the settlers' own tools turned against their throats. But Chanco could not do it. Could not kill the people who had welcomed him, fed him, treated him as family. So instead, before dawn, he woke Richard Pace and told him everything. Chief Opachanxano had coordinated a massive attack on every English settlement along the James River, planned to strike at the same moment, to kill every man, woman, and child before they could raise an alarm. Pace moved fast, secured his household, then in darkness rowed across the river to Jamestown, the water black, silent, the oars barely making sound. On the far shore, Jamestown still slept, unaware that in less than an hour Powhatan warriors would arrive at doorsteps with fish and venison, smiling, unarmed, offering to trade, and then would pick up whatever tools lay nearby and begin killing. Pace reached Jamestown, woke the authorities. The alarm spread through the settlement like fire through dry grass. Men grabbed muskets, women pulled children inside. Doors were barred, sentries posted, and when the Powhatan warriors arrived that morning expecting surprise, they found instead armed colonists waiting behind fortified walls. Jamestown would survive, but the outlying settlements, scattered, isolated, defenseless, would not. At Martin's Hundred, a plantation 20 miles downriver from Jamestown, the morning began like any other. The settlement housed about 140 people, men, women, children, families who had crossed the Atlantic seeking new lives, new land, new futures. They had no warning, no rider from Jamestown, no time to prepare. The plantation was too far, too isolated, the roads too poor for a message to reach them before the attack. The Powhatan came at dawn, not as warriors, as traders. They carried deer, turkeys, fish, baskets of corn. They smiled. They spoke in broken English, gesturing at their goods, asking to come inside to show what they had brought. And the settlers, who had lived in relative peace with the Powhatan for years, who traded with them regularly, who saw them as neighbors if not quite friends, opened their doors. Then, at a signal no one saw coming, everything changed. The Powhatan grabbed tools, axes, hatchets, hoes, knives, anything within reach, and began killing. No hesitation, no warning shout, just sudden explosive violence. Men were struck down in their doorways, women were killed in their kitchens, children were dragged from hiding places and murdered. The screaming started, but there was no one to hear it, no help coming, no escape. At Martin's Hundred, between 60 and 80 people died in minutes. Nearly half the population, entire families erased. The Powhatan did not stop with killing. They mutilated the bodies, defacing corpses, dragging them through the dirt, carrying away severed limbs as trophies. The settlement was burned, crops destroyed, livestock slaughtered. What had been a thriving plantation that morning was, by noon, a smoking ruin filled with the dead. At Bennett's Welcome, another plantation downriver, more than 60 settlers were killed. At Berkeley Hundred, George Thorpe, a high-ranking colonial official and Anglican missionary who had spent years trying to convert the Powhatan to Christianity, was among the dead. Thorpe had been kind to the Powhatan, advocated for their fair treatment, believed that peaceful coexistence was possible. He died like the rest, suddenly, violently, without mercy. You're inside this moment now. Stay with us. What happens next rewrote the rules of survival in the New World. The attacks were coordinated with terrifying precision. Across 31 settlements, at roughly the same hour, Powhatan warriors struck. They had infiltrated the settlements days earlier, observing routines, noting where weapons were kept, identifying who would resist and who would die easily. They had shared meals with the colonists the night before, laughed with them, traded with them, all while knowing what would come at sunrise. This was not random violence. This was military strategy, a calculated attempt by Opachanxano, paramount chief of the Powhatan Confederacy, to break the English colony in a single devastating blow. For over a decade, Opachanxano had watched English settlers spread across Powhatan lands like a disease, clearing forests for tobacco plantations, building fences that blocked hunting grounds, allowing livestock to trample sacred sites, stealing food, abusing Powhatan people. Peace had been established in 1614 after the marriage of Pocahontas and John Rolfe, but it was a fragile peace, built on English promises that were never kept. By 1622, the tobacco economy had made the Virginia colony profitable for the first time, but that success came at the Powhatan's expense. English farms spread along the James River and its tributaries, isolated and scattered, each settler seeking the richest soil regardless of whose land it had been. The colonists lived separated from each other, no single homestead within sight of its neighbor, each family alone in the wilderness, vulnerable. Opochancanoughs saw the opportunity. If he could strike all at once, coordinating attacks across dozens of settlements before any could send warning to the others, he could kill enough colonists to cripple the colony, force the survivors to abandon Virginia and sail back to England. It would be a warning: leave our lands or die. He spent months planning, traveling to distant tribes, coordinating with Waroenses across the region, ensuring that every warrior knew the signal, the timing, the targets. Originally, the attack was scheduled to coincide with a Powhatan religious ceremony, the taking up of Chief Powhatan's bones from the charnel house where they had rested since his death. The ceremony would provide cover for the massing of warriors, mass their preparations and ritual. But in 1621, a chief from the eastern shore revealed Opochancanough's plan to the English, warning them that he was attempting to acquire large quantities of water hemlock, one of the deadliest plants in Virginia, to poison the colonists. The English grew wary. Opochancanoughs was forced to delay. He waited. Let the colonists relax. Let them believe the danger had passed. And then, on the morning of March 22nd, 1622, he struck. The killing happened fast. Most settlements were hit before the sun fully rose. Warriors appeared at doors, friendly, unarmed, offering goods. Settlers invited them inside for breakfast. Women set plates. Children played at their feet. And then the Powhatan grabbed knives from kitchen tables, axes from wood piles, hammers from workshops, and began the slaughter. At one homestead, a woman was killed while nursing her infant. The child was left alive, crying in her dead mother's arms. At another, a man was struck down while praying, his Bible still open on the table in front of him. Entire families were killed in their sleep, never waking, never knowing. Others fought back, desperately, using whatever they could find: fireplace pokers, cooking pots, their bare hands. But they were outnumbered, overwhelmed, killed where they stood. The Powhatan used the colonists' own tools against them. Hatchets that had been traded weeks earlier now split English skulls. Hoes meant for planting tobacco were driven through English chests. The metal tools that had cemented trade relationships between Powhatan and English became instruments of murder. The irony was bitter, inescapable. The very items that had built trust were now used to destroy it. By noon, 347 colonists were dead. Nearly one-third of the entire population of the Virginia colony. Men, women, children, no one was spared. The Powhatan did not take prisoners. This was not a raid for captives or plunder. This was extermination. But Opochancanough's plan had one critical flaw. Jamestown survived. Thanks to Chanco's warning and Richard Pace's midnight row across the river, the colonial capital and its garrison were prepared. When Powhatan warriors arrived expecting easy targets, they found armed men waiting behind fortified walls. The attack on Jamestown was called off. The warriors melted back into the forest. That single failure ensured the colony's survival. Jamestown became a rallying point, a refuge for the scattered survivors of the outlying plantations. But the immediate aftermath was chaos. Settlers abandoned their homes and fled toward Jamestown, carrying whatever they could, leaving behind crops, livestock, everything they had built. The colony contracted, pulling back from the frontier, fortifying the few defensible positions that remained. The survivors were traumatized, furious, terrified. They had lived among the Powhatan for years, traded with them, shared meals, believed that peace was possible. Now they saw every native face as a potential threat, every friendly gesture as a prelude to violence. Trust was dead. Whatever fragile coexistence had existed before March 22nd was gone, replaced by hatred and fear. Bodies lay unburied for days. There were too many dead, not enough living to bury them. Some corpses were thrown into the river, which ran red for miles downstream. Others were left where they fell, rotting in the ruins of burned homes picked at by animals. When a ship arrived at Martin's 100 weeks later, survivors hurriedly buried the dead in mass graves and abandoned the settlement forever. Archaeological excavations at Martin's, 100 centuries later, revealed the horror frozen in time: skeletons with shattered skulls, bodies buried hastily in shallow graves, the remains of homes burned to their foundations. The site remains one of the most important archaeological records of colonial violence in America. The bones tell the story that written records often obscured. This was not just a massacre, but a moment when two civilizations collided and the result was mutual annihilation. The English response was swift and brutal. The Virginia colony declared total war on the Powhatan Confederacy. No more pretense of peace. No more attempts at coexistence. The goal was simple: extermination. English commanders issued orders to kill any Powhatan on sight, to burn their villages, destroy their crops, poison their water supplies. In the summer of 1622, English forces began systematic raids on Powhatan settlements. They waited until the Powhatan were away foraging, then burned their towns, destroyed their food stores, salted their fields so nothing would grow. When the Powhatan returned to find their homes in ashes and their winter food supplies destroyed, they faced starvation. But Opichenchino was not defeated. He resumed guerrilla attacks, ambushing English patrols, raiding isolated homesteads, bleeding the colony slowly. The Second Anglo-Powhatan War had begun, and it would last for a decade. If stories like this matter, subscribe, keep history alive. In the spring of 1623, the English attempted a different strategy: deception. Opicapam, Opichenchino's brother and nominal paramount chief, invited the English to his capital on the Pamunkey River to discuss peace and arrange ransom for English prisoners taken the year before. The English accepted. They arrived in May with casks of wine, gifts, promises of reconciliation. It was a trap. The wine was poisoned. After the Powhatan drank, the English opened fire, killing dozens. According to their own accounts, the English brought home part of their heads. They scalped the dead and took the scalps as trophies. Opichenchino was seriously wounded and disappeared from English records for years, possibly near death, possibly hiding, recovering, planning his next move. The war ground on: raids, counter-raids, villages burned, crops destroyed, people on both sides killed in ambushes, skirmishes, massacres. The English had superior weapons, muskets, cannon, metal armor, but the Powhatan had superior knowledge of the land, could move unseen through forests, strike and vanish before the English could retaliate. By 1632, both sides were exhausted. A tentative peace was negotiated, though it was more a ceasefire than a genuine resolution. The English agreed to stop their raids. The Powhatan agreed to stop attacking settlements. But trust was gone. The peace held only because neither side had the strength to continue fighting. The immediate impact of the 1622 attack extended far beyond the death toll. The Virginia colony nearly collapsed. Hundreds more colonists died in the months following the massacre, not from violence, but from starvation, disease, exposure. The attack had destroyed crops just before harvest. The survivors, crowded into Jamestown, had no food reserves. They were too terrified to venture back to their farms to plant new crops. By winter, famine had set in. The Virginia Company of London, which funded and managed the colony, faced financial ruin. Investors lost confidence. Ships stopped bringing new settlers. The company's stock plummeted. By 1624, the Virginia Company collapsed entirely, and the colony was taken over by the English crown, becoming a royal colony. But the colony survived. Slowly, painfully, the English rebuilt. New settlers arrived, farms were reestablished, though now fortified, clustered together for defense rather than scattered along the river. The English learned to build stockades, to post sentries, to never trust the Powhatan again. The psychological impact was profound and lasting. The 1622 massacre became a foundational myth of American colonialism. Proof, the English said, that Native Americans were savage, treacherous, inherently violent, incapable of civilization. The fact that the attack was a response to English encroachment, theft, and violence was conveniently forgotten. English propaganda portrayed the Powhatan as barbaric monsters who had violated a sacred peace, murdered innocent women and children in their beds, mutilated corpses in acts of demonic cruelty. Edward Waterhouse, secretary of the Virginia Company, published an official account of the massacre that described the Powhatan as treacherous infidels who had committed barbarous murder. The account was widely circulated in England, shaping public perception of Native Americans for generations. It justified further violence against indigenous people, painting English expansion not as conquest but as self-defense against savage aggression. The reality was far more complex. The Powhatan had watched English settlers spread across their lands for 15 years, breaking promises, stealing food, destroying sacred sites, pushing indigenous people further from the James River that had been their home for centuries. The 1622 attack was not random savagery. It was a calculated military offensive designed to expel an invading force. It failed because of Chanko's warning, not because the English were morally superior or divinely protected. But that nuance was lost in the propaganda. The image of the savage Indian became embedded in colonial consciousness. Every subsequent conflict between colonists and Native Americans would be filtered through the lens of 1622. Proof that coexistence was impossible, that the only solution was total subjugation or extermination. Opichenchino survived the Second Anglo-Powhatan War, though barely. By 1630, he had succeeded his brother Opicapam as paramount chief of the Powhatan Confederacy. He was old now, possibly in his 70s or 80s, ancient by the standards of the time, but still burning with hatred for the English who had taken his land, killed his people, destroyed his world. He watched the English colony grow stronger, more prosperous, more entrenched. New settlements spread along the river. The tobacco economy boomed. More ships arrived from England, bringing more settlers, more guns, more determination to stay. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably in favor of the English. But Opochancanouugh was not finished. For 20 years he waited, biding his time, secretly coordinating with tribes across Virginia, planning one final desperate attempt to drive the English into the sea. On April 18, 1644, at nearly 100 years old, he launched another massive coordinated attack on English settlements. The 1644 attack killed even more colonists than the 1622 massacre, possibly 400 or more. But by then, the colony was too large, too well defended, too deeply rooted to be uprooted. The English retaliated with overwhelming force. Opochancanouugh was captured and taken to Jamestown. Old, blind, unable to walk, he was carried into the settlement on a litter. The English displayed him like a trophy, a broken remnant of a dying world. Days later, one of his guards shot him in the back. He died in captivity, never having seen the English leave Virginia. His death marked the end of organized Powhatan resistance. The tribes were forced to sign a treaty acknowledging their subordination to the English crown, conceding that they held their lands only at the pleasure of the King of England. The Powhatan Confederacy, which had once controlled all of Tidewater, Virginia, was shattered. The survivors were confined to small reservations, their numbers decimated by war, disease, starvation. Within a generation, the Powhatan had become a marginalized minority in their own homeland. The 1622 massacre had been the beginning of the end. It had failed to expel the English, but it had succeeded in one thing. It had guaranteed that there would be no peace, no coexistence, no shared future. The violence of March 22, 1622, ensured that the relationship between English colonists and Native Americans would be defined by warfare, mistrust, and ultimately genocide. The physical landscape of Virginia bears scars from that day. Martin's Hundred was never rebuilt. It remains an archaeological site, a memorial to the dead. Other settlements destroyed in 1622 were abandoned, reclaimed by forest, their names surviving only in historical records. The James River, which ran red with blood that day, still flows past the ruins of those settlements, indifferent to the violence that unfolded on its banks. Descendants of the survivors carry the stories forward. The Pace family holds annual ceremonies honoring Richard Pace and Chanco, laying wreaths at memorial sites, keeping alive the memory of the midnight warning that saved Jamestown. Historians continue to study the attack, analyzing its causes, its execution, its consequences. Archaeologists excavate the sites of destroyed plantations, uncovering artifacts that tell the story in fragments: burned timbers, broken pottery, human bones with trauma marks consistent with violent death. The 1622 massacre was not the first violence between English colonists and Native Americans, and it was far from the last, but it was a turning point, a moment when the possibility of peaceful coexistence died permanently. After March 27, 1622, there would be no more pretense of friendship, no more trade partnerships built on mutual respect, no more hope that two civilizations could share the land. What remained was war, sometimes open, sometimes hidden, but always present, a conflict that would continue for centuries, defining the American experience, shaping the mythology of the frontier, justifying the displacement and destruction of indigenous peoples across the continent. The blast ended in one morning, but its echo rewrote centuries. The names of the dead are carved in memorials. The sites of destroyed plantations are marked with historical plaques. Museums display artifacts recovered from the ruins: axes, pottery shards, musket balls, human remains. The story is taught in schools, analyzed in academic papers, commemorated in annual remembrance ceremonies. 400 years later, the James River still flows past Jamestown. The land where Martin's Hundred stood is quiet now, covered in forest, the graves of the victims lost beneath centuries of leaf litter and undergrowth. But the memory persists. The violence of March 20, 1622 remains a defining moment in American history, the day when the dream of peaceful colonization died and the reality of conquest was born. The massacre was not just an attack. It was a message, from Opochancanouugh to the English: leave or we will destroy you. But the English did not leave. They stayed and they fought and they won. And in winning, they created a myth that their survival was destiny, that their violence was justified, that the land was rightfully theirs because they had defended it with blood. That myth persists. It echoes in every frontier story, every Western narrative, every tale of settlers battling savage Indians. The truth is more complicated, more painful, more human, a story of two peoples fighting for survival, both willing to kill, both convinced of their righteousness, both leaving scars that never fully healed. 347 colonists died on March 22, 1622. They died in their homes, in their fields, at their breakfast tables. They died quickly or slowly, fighting or fleeing, knowing or unknowing. They died because the land they lived on had been taken from someone else, and that someone else wanted it back. The Powhatan lost far more, not just lives, but their entire world. The attack of 1622, intended to save their civilization, ultimately guaranteed its destruction. The English response was total war, a campaign of annihilation that would not end until the Powhatan were broken, scattered, confined to reservations, their culture suppressed, their language dying, their history rewritten by the victors. The massacre ended in hours. The consequences never stopped. The violence of that single morning cascaded forward through time, shaping colonial policy, justifying genocide, embedding itself in the foundational mythology of America. Every conflict between settlers and Native Americans that followed was compared to 1622, used as evidence that indigenous people could not be trusted, that peace was impossible, that the only solution was force. If this story moved you, subscribe and keep its echo alive. The sun set over the James River on March 22, 1622, just as it had risen, beautiful, indifferent, unconcerned with the blood that stained its banks. The river flowed on, carrying the bodies of the dead downstream, washing away the blood, erasing the physical evidence of violence. But the memory remained, and the war continued, and the land fought over, bled over, died over, changed hands forever. The 1622 massacre was not the end. It was the beginning of war, of hatred, of a centuries-long conflict that would reshape a continent. The attack failed in its immediate goal, but succeeded in creating a mythology that justified everything that came after. The dead became martyrs, the survivors became heroes, and the Powhatan became the enemy, forever marked as savage, forever blamed for the violence, forever erased from the narrative of American progress. The echo continues. The dead are remembered. The war, in some form, never ended. The land taken that day remains taken. And the James River flows on, silent witness to the moment when two worlds collided and only one survived.